It was exactly 1:17 a.m. when the first alert pinged softly on my phone. The sound was quiet, almost timid, but in the stillness of my apartment it rang through the silence like a bell in an empty cathedral. I froze, listening. The refrigerator hummed low in the background, a constant, benign noise. The faint whir of the air conditioning was the only other sound, and yet, somehow, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath with me. I should have ignored it. Any rational part of my mind screamed at me to close the feed and go back to sleep. But the other part, the part that had always been curious, reckless, daring, pulled me closer to the screen. And there, on the monitor, the living room looked empty. Too empty. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally, distorted by the dim light of the security camera. My pulse quickened, thudding against my chest, as if the sound itself were warning me. Then it moved. Just slightly at first, a flicker in the far corner, a subtle shift of darkness. My fingers hovered over the screen, almost touching the image, as though I could physically interact with it. My breathing slowed instinctively, each inhale deliberate, cautious, like I could control the situation simply by holding still. The alert blinked again, motion detected. And there, unmistakable, stood a figure. It wasn't a shadow in the traditional sense. Its shape was defined, but wrong. Its head hung slightly too low, shoulders stiff, limbs elongated in ways that made my skin crawl. There was no face to see, only a hollow silhouette that pressed against the edges of the camera's resolution, almost as if the lens itself was afraid to capture it fully. I leaned in closer, my eyes straining to discern details that shouldn't exist, to understand something my mind could not comprehend. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly, and I shivered, not from the cold of the apartment, but from a cold that sank deep into my bones, an invasive awareness that I was being observed. The light from the security feed flickered, almost in rhythm with my pulse, and then the figure moved. One step, slow, deliberate, precise. The floor beneath it remained intact, no sound, no echo, yet I felt the weight of its movement. Another alert pinged, louder this time, insistent. The kitchen camera. Another figure appeared, emerging from the darkness of the doorway, face featureless, eyes empty voids. And then the hallway camera blinked again. Another figure. And another, moving against the laws of space and time, bending around corners before I could process it. My apartment, the place I had always considered my sanctuary, felt alien now, heavy and constricted, like the walls themselves were pressing in, reshaping around the intruders. I considered calling the police, but every rational thought was drowned by a rising tide of dread. What could I even say? Hello, there are featureless people from missing persons reports standing in my living room? My mind stumbled over words that didn't exist, and a part of me, the part that had always been drawn to horror stories, to things that defied understanding, urged me to stay, to watch, to see what happened next. The first figure raised a hand, slowly, deliberately. It was a gesture that would have been benign in another context, but here it carried intention. A greeting, a warning, I could not tell which. And then I noticed it, a subtle detail I hadn't seen before. The way the air seemed to warp around them, bending light, twisting shadows, as if reality itself recoiled in their presence. My stomach churned. I felt the room shrink, compress, as if I were being funneled toward the monitors themselves. I swallowed hard, tasting copper on my tongue. My hands trembled, hovering over the device. My mind raced, trying to rationalize, to convince myself it was a glitch, a hacking script designed to terrify. But no, my inner voice hissed, this is real. Every fiber of my being screamed it. The silence outside, the distant hum of traffic, the gentle creak of the building settling, all normal, and yet they felt meaningless. My apartment was no longer mine. I was merely a spectator in a space claimed by something else. The figure took another step, closer to the edge of the camera's vision, its presence heavy and suffocating. I noticed the faintest hint of movement within the darkness, a twitch, a sway, subtle but deliberate. My pulse throbbed in my temples. My fingers itched to touch the screen, to prove I wasn't hallucinating, but a primal fear rooted me to the spot. Every instinct told me to run, to escape, but curiosity, that reckless, foolish curiosity, held me there. And then a second figure appeared. A woman, motionless, featureless, standing near the sofa. The camera feed blinked. My reflection shimmered faintly in the darkened screen. For a moment, I could have sworn that my own hollow version stared back at me, mimicking my tense posture, mirroring my growing fear. My heart skipped. I gasped softly, a sound swallowed instantly by the oppressive quiet. The silence stretched, each second elongated, each heartbeat amplified in my skull. I realized with a cold, sinking certainty that they were aware of me. Not just aware. They knew I was watching. And in that awareness was a kind of patient, deliberate intent, a promise that this was only the beginning. The alert blinked again. A soft ping, mechanical, almost polite. But it was a summons. And I was trapped in its gaze, unable to look away. I couldn't stop staring at the monitors. My hands were trembling so badly that I gripped the edges of the desk, trying to anchor myself to something solid, something real. But reality had already begun to unravel. The figures, the hollow, shadowed shapes, were moving now with purpose. They didn't stumble or hesitate. Every step was deliberate, almost ritualistic. And the most terrifying part? I recognized them. I scrolled through the archived footage, pulling up days, then weeks, then months of security alerts. My stomach dropped as I saw familiar faces. Or rather, familiar names attached to faces I had seen in news reports. Evelyn Hart, Marcus Lyle, Sarah Jennings. Missing people. People who had vanished from this world without explanation, now appearing in my living room at 1 a.m., caught in the surveillance lens as if they had never left. They weren't ghosts. Not exactly. They moved in ways no living human could, bending around corners, appearing in multiple cameras in seconds. Their faces were pale, hollow, drained of emotion, yet I felt their awareness. They were watching me. And in that watching, I felt my blood run cold. I realized that the reports I had read, they weren't stories. They were warnings. I leaned closer to the screen, forcing myself to take in every detail. Evelyn Hart's head tilted unnaturally, her eyes empty sockets, but I could feel her gaze pierce through the glass. Marcus Lyle's mouth opened slightly, making a soundless cry, a scream that vibrated in the room around me. Sarah Jennings' hand brushed against the edge of the sofa in the feed, moving impossibly fast, yet gracefully. The camera couldn't capture all of it. The shadows themselves seemed to stretch, twisting toward me, leaking from the screens into the apartment. I tried to step back, tried to tell myself it was just a glitch, a trick of light, a hallucination. But no part of me believed that anymore. A deeper, primal instinct, the one that had kept me alive through every urban exploration, every dare, every reckless night adventure, was screaming, "They are real. They are here. And they know you see them." The air in the room grew colder, heavier. I could see my breath, ghostly clouds in the dim glow of the screens. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached for my phone to call for help, but as I touched it, the figures multiplied. 1, 2, 3, now the hallway was filled with shadows, each one eerily similar yet distinctly different. They weren't random. They were patterned, synchronized, aware of each other, aware of me. I swallowed hard, dry and tense. My throat ached. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't real." But the whisper sounded foreign, hollow, like my own voice mocking me. Then, a detail I hadn't noticed before, my own reflection appeared on one of the monitors. Not my real reflection, but a hollow, distorted version, mimicking every movement. My heart froze. It raised its hand slowly, deliberately, mirroring mine as if testing the boundaries between us. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just observing them, they were observing me. And worse, they were teaching me something, inviting me into the frame, into their world. I wanted to look away, to close the feed and pretend none of this existed. But my eyes wouldn't obey. The hollow figures seemed to pull me in, compelling my gaze. The alerts came faster now, one ping after another, filling my room with a rhythm that was not mechanical but alive, oppressive. Every movement, every twitch on the screen made me shiver, made me question what was real and what was not. And then I noticed the subtle distortions. The shadows weren't entirely on the floor or the walls. They were hovering, shifting in ways physics shouldn't allow. The edges of the screens warped slightly, bending light, twisting corners, creating impossible perspective. My living room, the place I had thought I knew intimately, was becoming alien. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. I gasped, feeling a weight pressing against my chest, as if the very apartment resented my presence. A sound made me jump, not from the monitors, but behind me, a soft tap like a fingernail on glass. I spun, but the room was empty. My apartment was silent, except for the hum of electricity and the faint whisper of my own ragged breathing. And yet, in the feed, the figures moved closer. Not randomly, deliberately. Their hollow eyes fixed on me, as if pulling me, enticing me, daring me to step further into their domain. I sank into my chair, trying to rationalize, trying to cling to logic. Maybe someone was hacking the system. Maybe it was a sophisticated AI. Anything that could explain this without erasing my sanity. But the way the shadows synchronized, the subtle gestures, the hollow reflections, they weren't artificial. They were alive, aware, and patient, watching me, waiting. Minutes stretched into eternity. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I stared. And in that watching, I realized something horrifying. The missing people weren't just appearing on my cameras, they were marking me, preparing me. The hollow versions of themselves were teaching me how to exist in the space between their world and mine, a liminal place where nothing made sense, where time and space bent to their will. And then a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, not from the speakers, not from the monitors, but in my head. You see us. You belong. I could feel it, crawling under my skin, tugging at my mind, tempting me. I wanted to scream, to run, to smash the monitors, but I couldn't. I was rooted, held fast by terror and fascination, staring into eyes that should not exist, understanding at that instant that this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I just sat there, anchored to my chair, the cold glow of the monitors bleaching the room into a colorless void. Hours crawled by, stretching and bending in ways I couldn't track. My mind felt scraped raw. I kept telling myself I'd shut the system down, turn off the alerts, unplug everything. But something in me refused to move. Fear, curiosity, dread, whatever it was, it kept me locked in place. Every few minutes, I would force myself to blink. Each time my eyes closed, I felt a phantom pressure, like someone standing inches from my face, watching me with breath I couldn't feel. And every time my eyes opened again, the shadows on the screens seemed slightly closer. Not drastically, not enough to scream about, just wrong. Slightly shifted, slightly angled toward me. And I felt it, not imagined, felt it. Like the cameras themselves were changing their focus. Around 3:37 a.m., the strangest thing happened. A soft click echoed through the apartment. I recognized the sound instantly. It was the rotation motor of one of the cameras. The motor only activates during manual control. Except, I wasn't touching anything. My hands were in my lap. My phone was on the floor. No one else was home. Slowly, painfully slowly, I turned toward the hallway where the living room camera was mounted. And I froze. The camera was pointed directly at me. Before this moment, it had always been angled across the room, watching the entryway. I'd installed it myself, screwed in the bracket, tested the rotation limit. It physically could not turn far enough to aim straight down the hall toward my office door. And yet, it was perfectly aligned, like an eye staring at the back of my skull. A cold, trembling panic built in my chest. But I forced myself to look back at the monitors, at the live feed from that same camera. I needed to see. I needed proof this wasn't just exhaustion. When my gaze met the screen, all the air left my lungs in a single, shaky gasp. On the feed, the hallway was empty. No shadows, no figures, just stillness. Except, there was me, sitting at my desk, facing the monitors, motionless, like a mannequin version of myself, like something wearing my skin posed in my seat. I leaned forward, squinting, breath shallow. The figure in the feed leaned forward, too, but not perfectly. A beat too late, a fraction off sync, like it needed a moment to observe what I was doing. Before copying it, my stomach twisted. "Okay, this is a glitch," I whispered. My own voice cracked in the air like something brittle snapping. But deep down, beneath every rational thought I tried to cling to, something hollow whispered back at me. "No, not a glitch." I reached out, my hand shaking uncontrollably, and touched the edge of my desk. My reflection touched nothing. It only tilted its head. Slowly, unnaturally, like a dog hearing a sound from another dimension. I felt something behind me. Not a person, not a presence, just a shift, a thickening of the air, as if reality itself had tightened its grip on the room. My heartbeat hammered against my ribs in uneven, painful thuds. The sensation grew stronger, rising like static in a charged atmosphere. And then, the figure on the screen smiled. Not a human smile. Not even close. It dragged its lips too far, stretching into a crooked, tearing grin that split the skin along its cheeks. No blood, no pain, just an opening. My vision blurred as a cold sweat drenched my forehead. I slowly turned my head toward the hallway again. The camera hadn't moved, still pointed at me, still silent, still watching, but now, from its direction, I heard whispering, faint, breathy, like someone speaking from underwater. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it felt pleading, beckoning. I forced myself to stand. My legs wobbled, barely able to support my weight. As I rose, I kept my eyes locked on the monitor showing my distorted reflection. It didn't stand. It didn't move. It just watched me rise with that same too-wide smile, as if eager to see what I would do next. Every internal instinct I had screamed, "Don't go into the hallway. Don't move closer to that thing. Don't let it see you." But another voice, quieter, deeper, urged me forward, not because it wanted me safe, but because it wanted to see what would happen. I stepped into the hallway, each footstep painfully slow, the floorboards groaning under my weight like they, too, wanted to warn me. The whispering grew louder, still unintelligible but unmistakably directed at me. The air felt thick, heavy, as if I were walking through something viscous, like warm syrup clinging to my clothes, resisting my movement. The camera lens glinted faintly from the darkness above. A tiny red recording light blinked on and off, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Then, the whispering stopped. Dead silence. A silence so absolute it pressed on my eardrums, made my breath sound unnaturally loud. I raised a hand toward the camera. Not to touch it, I wasn't stupid, just to see if my reflection would mimic me again. But before I even reached halfway, the hallway lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out altogether. Total darkness swallowed me. And from behind me, from the direction of my office, came the soft, unmistakable creaking of my computer chair turning. As if someone had sat down. In my place, I froze in place, chest tight, throat dry, staring into the pitch-black hallway. The sound of the chair creaking stopped as suddenly as it began. My ears strained for any other sound. Anything. The faint hum of the monitors, the distant hiss of the air conditioner, those were all I could hear. My own breathing sounded like a drumbeat in my skull, uneven, panicked, and loud enough to make me want to tear my ears off. I slowly lowered my hand. The monitors glowed faintly, illuminating the outlines of my office. That's when I saw it. Another alert popped up. I almost didn't register it at first. Alerts had become common. Motion detected. Sometimes a raccoon. Sometimes a neighbor walking their dog. But this time, it was different. The timestamp was wrong. Not today. Not even yesterday. It was weeks old, though the alert had just triggered. And the figure? It was standing exactly where I had been sitting, in my chair, back when I first noticed the cameras shifting. I leaned closer. My eyes burned from the glare of the screens. My pulse raced. The figure was me. Or rather, a version of me. Sitting perfectly still, hands folded on the desk, head tilted slightly. But the face, oh God, the face was wrong. Eyes too wide. Smile stretched almost impossibly. Skin pale, like wax, reflecting the monitor light in a strange sheen. I pressed my palm to my mouth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs felt rooted to the ground. And then another alert. This time, it was from the hallway camera. I almost collapsed. The timestamp, again, days ago. The figure in the feed was standing, motionless. Not me this time, not exactly. It was taller, gaunt, with a hunched posture, and its head, like the other one, was turned just slightly toward the camera, as if it were aware I was watching it now. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, there were more alerts. I couldn't keep track of them all. Every camera in the apartment had triggered, all at once. Every feed was alive. Every figure, the same pale, malformed shape, stood, crouched, or leaned in angles that shouldn't have been possible. Some of them looked vaguely human. Others grotesque, thin in ways that made their limbs appear broken or elongated. I backed up slowly, tripping over a chair. The sound rang through the apartment, loud enough to feel like an explosion in my ears. And then I heard whispering again. This time, unmistakable. Not muffled, not distant. My name. Soft. Drawn out. Jamie. 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 I spun toward the sound. Nothing. Only shadows in the corners, stretched thin by the glow of the monitors. I turned back. Every camera feed showed movement now. Figures drifting across rooms, bending around corners, appearing in doorways that had been empty a second ago. And each time they mimicked me. My gestures, my posture, my breathing. I pressed my hand to the keyboard, trying to shut everything down. Power off, power off, power off. But the alerts didn't stop. The monitors flickered, and in the darkness between the flickers, I saw them closer. Not on the screens. In the room. At first, just a shadow. Thin, moving along the wall behind me. My neck craned painfully as I tried to see, but it vanished when my eyes focused. Then another. Then another. The whispering intensified, coming from all directions. It was no longer calling my name. It was chanting. Low, guttural, a string of incomprehensible syllables that wrapped around my bones like smoke. I ran to the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock. My apartment, normally safe, now felt like a trap. I could hear them moving behind me. Slow steps, scraping across the carpet. Not one, not two, but many. A procession. And then it hit me. The alerts. The timestamps. The missing people. Each alert from a different camera. Each figure a different person. Missing from weeks, months, even years ago. And they weren't missing anymore. Because they were here. In some way. In some horrible, twisted, unexplainable way. Watching. Waiting. Copying. The chair at my desk shifted again. Not a chair. Someone or something sat there. And for the first time, I felt a cold certainty. These weren't ghosts. Not exactly. They were echoes, copies, reflections of life stolen, stitched together from the absent. I could feel it now. They wanted me. And the whispers, no longer gentle. Now they were sharp, frantic, insistent. Join us, come, sit. My hands trembled on the doorknob. My chest ached. My mind screamed, but I couldn't process fast enough. Then the monitors went black. The apartment was silent. Too silent. I knew I had seconds, or maybe less. I spun, ready to run, and froze. The doorway behind me was full of faces. Blank, featureless, smiling, pale. Rows of them, stacked impossibly in the shadows. And every single one of them looking at me. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor, my hands numb, my mind a storm of panic and disbelief. The doorway behind me was no longer just a doorway. It had become a wall of faces. Pale, blank, featureless, yet somehow aware. They weren't merely looking. They were searching, combing through the darkness of my mind, rifling through memories, locating every fear I'd ever tried to bury. My breath came in shallow gasps. The whispering had transformed into a chorus, hundreds of voices overlapping, chanting, laughing, crying, all at once. Each sound pierced through me like icy needles, vibrating through my bones, rattling my chest, hammering against my skull. Join us, join us, join us. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, hitting the edge of my desk. My fingers scrambled over the keyboard. Anything. I pressed every key, every button, hoping to shut down the monitors, cut the power, anything. But the screens didn't respond. Instead, new alerts flooded in. Motion detected everywhere. Each alert contained a new face. Familiar faces. Faces from the news. Faces from the missing persons reports I had scrolled past countless times. Faces I had looked at and thought, someone is out there somewhere. They were here. All of them. I tried to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat. My mind spun. Could this be a hallucination? A psychotic break? Or was it real? Too real. The air had grown thick and heavy, suffocating, like swimming in molasses. The smell of dust and decay mixed with something sweet, metallic, like blood long dried. I gagged. A figure stepped forward from the shadowed doorway. A child. My age, maybe younger. Pale, eyes too wide, lips stretched in an unnatural, frozen smile. It tilted its head. I froze. Something inside me screamed that if I looked away, if I blinked, it would vanish, or worse, move closer. The monitors flickered. For a brief, torturous second, I caught my own reflection on one screen, my pale face, wide-eyed, frozen in terror. Then the reflection smiled. Not me. Not really. Something had learned my expression. Something had taken it. Another alert. A timestamp from months ago. And there, in the feed, was my apartment, my empty apartment with me sitting at my desk. Only it wasn't me. A pale, distorted version sat there, smiling, tilting its head exactly as I had just done. I stumbled backward. The whispers grew louder. I could feel the pressure building inside my skull, the weight of all the missing, all the lost, all the stolen lives pressing down on me. I could hear their thoughts, or was it my thoughts? Leave, stay, join us. I backed into the corner, shaking. My eyes darted to the nearest window. Moonlight spilling in, reflecting the empty streets outside. But the moonlight flickered. Shadows moved. Figures crouched behind trees, along the walls, in the corners of the apartment I hadn't noticed before. They weren't human. Not entirely. Limbs bent at impossible angles, heads too small, too large, too twisted. Faces, some with eyes, some without, stared at me. My pulse thundered in my ears. Sweat poured down my face. Every nerve screamed, run. I lunged toward the door. My fingers fumbled the knob. It turned. And the hallway. It stretched longer than it should have. Walls warped, shadows crawling along them like living things. The pale figures lined the hallway, slowly advancing. Not running, not walking. Gliding. Moving with the certainty of inevitability. I ran. Stumbled. Fell. Their whispers surrounded me, pressing against my skull like waves of ice. I could feel their breath, smell their decay, their hunger for me. My hands scrabbled for something, anything. My flashlight, my phone, my camera. Anything to hold on to reality. The first figure reached me. I saw its face up close. Featureless. Smooth, pale, with eyes like black pits. It tilted its head. The whispering stopped. Absolute silence fell, only for a heartbeat. Then its mouth opened impossibly wide, stretching like taffy. I screamed. I ran. I tripped again, slammed into the wall. My shoulder cracked against the drywall. Pain shot through me, but I didn't care. I scrambled to my feet, tearing through the warped hallway. Figures multiplied behind me, their footsteps silent, yet their presence pressed against my back like iron hands. I reached the stairwell. My apartment building's normal stairwell. The door, I thought, was salvation. But as I approached, I realized something impossibly wrong. The stairwell descended endlessly into darkness. Floors stacked atop floors, spiraling down like some nightmarish labyrinth. I could hear whispers coming from below. Familiar voices. My family. Old friends. People I recognized from missing persons report. Their voices called my name, pleading, beckoning. I wanted to stop. I wanted to listen. But I couldn't. Something primal screamed at me. Escape, escape, escape. I jumped. I don't know how many flights. I can't count the floors. The darkness swallowed me. The whispering grew into screams, and then, suddenly, the stairwell ended. Concrete floor. Silent. Empty. No walls. Just darkness around me. My apartment above was gone. The monitors, the pale figures, everything vanished. I lay there, gasping, wet with sweat, hands scraping concrete. Silence. Peace. Temporary. Until my phone buzzed. An alert. Motion detected in my apartment. And the timestamp, future. Tomorrow.